everyone, and welcome to our second day of Books Alive online events. Today we have Dan from the Wairarapa Library Services interviewing Selina Tusitala Marsh, a finalist for the New Zealand Book Awards for Children and Young Adults. Her book, Mophead Tu, The Queen's Poem, is nominated for an Elsie Locke Non-fiction Award. So take it away, Dan and Selina.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Wonderful. Welcome to our Books Alive event. It is my great honor and pleasure here to introduce Dr. Selina Tusitala Marsh, a poet, scholar, literary hero, all-around literary hero, who served as Poet Laureate of New Zealand from 2017 to 2019. Her books of poetry include Fast Talking PI, Dark Sparring, and Tightrope. As Jackie introduced, her first book, Mophead, well, I guess you were talking about Mophead too. Her first book, Mophead, was the supreme winner at the New Zealand Book Awards for Children and Young Adults last year. And now we're back talking about Mophead Tu, long-awaited sequel. Marsh was widely published, widely celebrated poet and scholar, appointed an officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit for services to poetry and literature in the Pacific community, elected a fellow of the Royal Society of New Zealand as well. Marsh is of Samoan, Tuvaluan, English, Scottish, and French descent. And in her work, in her scholarship, in her poetry, in her essays, often addresses really wonderfully deep, rich questions of identity, who we are, and what we need to be, and how we talk to each other. All questions that I think lie at the heart of these two beautiful books, the first Mophead and Mophead Tu. So welcome, Selina. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Talofa lava, bulavanaka, maloelele, kiorana, whakalofalahi atu, namaste. Warm Pacific greetings to you, Dan. And that's really a mouthful, isn't it? I mean, it's like I kind of sit back and wonder, how did that all happen? And at the core of everything is just realizing more and more how your difference makes the difference. And it sounds like a logo, but it's so true. It's like if we just embrace that thing that makes us unique, like the world responds, you know? Yeah, that's kind of the big lesson that Mophead keeps teaching me in every facet of my life.
I see that in that book. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how it came to be. In some of the reading about your work, one of the moments in your essays, at one point you talked about being a scholar and realizing, hey, like let's write some poetry, like that sense of possibility, and then along comes this same sense of possibility when it's like, hey, let's make some drawings, let's make a book. Can you talk about the sort of inspiration of that transition from poetry into an illustrated children's book?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it took me maybe like 10 years to figure out what I was at university. So I finished my PhD, I was lecturing, I was writing poetry secretly on the side because I had never taken a creative writing class, never taken a poetry writing class. That was for the proper poets with the capital P. And so over the years, I began kind of melding these kind of disparate parts of myself into one cohesive, whole, fun, joyful, energetic kind of identity. And so I call myself a Pacifica poet-scholar. And it's that bridge, which is one of the themes of Mophead Tu. It's like, bridging opposing sides, where I learned to bring my poetry in, because it's through poetry that I know the world better, that I can integrate this outside knowledge into here, into my body, and make it fun, and make it expressive and put my own kind of spin on it. So poetry has always been in my critical writing as well. I cannot write a critical article without poetically providing a bridge for the reader, and also positioning myself in relation to this, to the research field. So when I published my first book of poems in 2009, Fast Talking PI, and then I saw how that titular poem just took off in the schools, I was like, wow, this is I just wrote about what I was feeling on the day and how I wanted to name all these different identities that I could identify with. And I didn't know at the time that lots of other people were looking for a vehicle to similarly locate themselves in our world.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I mean, Mophead, I like that sense of like, here's a way to locate yourself, a way to think about locating yourself. It's
my poetic Tūranga Waiwai, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So my poetic Tūranga Waiwai, and your roots just go deep into the earth. Yeah, using many mediums of expression, and poetry is one. My gosh, drawing, doodling, being led by the line, not just the written line, but the drawn line. Man, to explore the bloodline, man, that was like my happy spot.
It's beautiful. And, as coming to it from, someone with academic and creative writing background, there are in those fields, for our listeners elsewhere, like there are some hard boundaries in those fields. They shouldn't be. And the thrill of your work to me is somebody who just crosses them, leaps across them, draws the line across them, draws a line through them. You don't, the poet, even just poet - scholar, out there's a lot of haters who don't see how those are born to be together. So I saw your poem emailing Albert Wendt. This is so cool. Like this is the poetic scholarly response. I loved it. But in these books, this question of difference that you mentioned, I think it's really interesting. The difference between the two books, between Mophead and Mophead Tu. The question of how difference plays in their story. The first book really focuses, as I read it, really focuses on sort of celebrating this difference. Our hero sort of both discovers and celebrates and sort of becomes, declares her difference in the scene on the boat with the little boy saying, this is my toko toko, this is who I am. Your difference is what we need. The second one takes a slightly different arc. For the readers who haven't read it yet, the second one tells the story of Mophead going to, I'm not sure, I want to call her Selina or just call her Mophead. Like
she's Mophead.
She's Mophead. Like, this sort of literary alter ego. But real life Selina went and read a poem to the Queen. The big Commonwealth shindig that they do. And so Mophead does that in the second book. But the second book, you dig into these sort of hard questions of colonialism and the history here. There are, there are gunboats. There are little gunboats in there. And yet, that there is a lot of difference in that question. And yet the book ends in a moment of real unity. Have a cup of tea. Do you see the two stories as addressing the question of difference differently in different fashions, or how do you see those relating to each other?
Good question, Dan. I actually see them as all part of the same thing in a holistic sense, in that, there are several through lines. One of them is access, right? One of them is being a bridge and determined to not choose or to be put in other people's boxes, and how we are to be in this world. And so, and also just keeping it as true as possible. Like, and the truth hurts and it's painful at times to keep standing in your difference. And, in Mophead Tu, I get challenged by one of my own peers about whether, I'm being a bit of a sellout, by going and performing for, our former colonizing, the
head colonizer.
Colonizers, right? Yeah. And that really hurt. And that was the genesis of Mophead Tu, actually. I knew that with Mophead 1, there were all these other possible strands to follow up with. Mophead 2, it just was like, man, I've just got to, Neil Gaiman said in an interview early on, he said, you've just got to write about what makes you uncomfortable in order to keep it real and keep it edgy. And for me, for creative writing to continue to be cathartic and to continue to be an empowering place for my tūranga waiwai, for my roots to kind of go down into the earth. So, hang on, my son is just crunching stuff on the floor in the kitchen. he's bobbed down there. So it's like I had to take that moment because my feelings were hurt. I did not expect to be kind of attacked by one of my own colleagues. These are my people, right? You know, you kind of shore up yourself for to be challenged by people who are not like you, and then to kind of have it kind of sting me at the back was not a new experience, but I just thought I need to share this because that human vulnerability is something that everyone can relate to, you know. So I like to keep my stories, yes, specifically Pacific, but absolutely human and universal. And being different in a plethora of ways is that thing that we share in common and being human. I don't see there's the page of the bridge, you know, where I say I bridge, here it is, you know, I bridge, not block. Because for me, nothing good comes out of blocking and just cutting off. And I know that there are also times where you need to place your boundaries and simply not engage with stuff. But on the whole, it's like sharing our thoughts over a cup of tea. There's a you and I in unity. That's the thing that's going to move us all deeper and together.
It's beautiful. I experienced as a real difference between the two books, a deepening in the sense that the sort of like difference, the celebrating difference. Okay, this is echoing stories that have been told in other contexts. I feel this, I recognize this. And the second book, as you say, like there's some hard questions there, and you just go right at them cheerfully, you know, with warmth and wonder. And I find that really, really exciting, really refreshing. The bridge is not an easy thing. It does not resolve easily.
No, but I've had a lot of feedback from teachers who are like, thank goodness now, like for kids to be able to have the word colonialism in their mouths and to begin to understand the dynamics of it and what that means and to relate it to a human experience of being overpowered or being bullied and kind of, you know, that's the power of the drawings, I find. Like there's so much space and potential ambiguity in the drawings. They don't just kind of, you know, kind of preach and leave it be or pronounce one kind of solid judgment. There's all this space for interpretation and what people bring and fun as well and lightness in kind of addressing some of those heavier issues.
They do feel light on the page. I literally was like, oh, those are gunboats. So bring it on, you know. But you handle it with a real grace on the page, I think.
You bring peace and order.
Yes, you know, the love. Sort of connected to this, another thing that I thought was really interesting about both books together is this question of authority and the authority figure. Both books sort of repeat a story of Mophead encountering various authority figures. Barack Obama shows up in the first book. The second book, we have the Queen, repeatedly sort of meeting them and engaging with them. And, you know, I came to the books thinking, okay, you know, Selina's a poet. I'm coming in from the poetry side. And I think, isn't this interesting? Because, you know, poetry, you know, not a discipline known for its respective authority, right? It's not what poets do. And yet this book seems to have this sort of respectful approach to them. But then I sort of stepped back and thought about it, coming into it from a kid's story, from a kid's book perspective. And in kid's book, it seems to me, you know, reading to my little ones at home, that in kids' book, this is often a real bifurcation between the authority figure as, you know, a benevolent fairy godmother mentor or evil villain. and the authority figures in your book are not either. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? I wonder what if you have any thoughts about sort of Mophead's relationship to authority, to the power of these authority figures, and how you see that theme in your work.
Well, I see it very personally, actually. Like I was raised as a good Samoan daughter where you do as you're told and you don't ask questions. It's not a default in my nature. And I've been struggling against that because at university, I thought if I just keep on doing as I'm told, I will shrivel up like a prune and lose joy and effervescence and passion for the field. So I have to decide how to negotiate those figures of authority. And they loomed larger in my own head, actually, than out there. And so, I've got the creation of Mini Mophead, who is my alter ego's alter ego, right?
Yes.
And she's the one she's the one that's brave and courageous and asks the awkward questions and isn't afraid to look silly and prompts Mophead, who is always negotiating, well, what's the Commonwealth? And, and that's introducing Albert Wendt, who was my supervisor at, Auckland University when I did my PhD, introducing his definition of post-colonialism and explaining that. And I was talking to a couple of teacher friends of mine. I said, is this a little bit dry? Should I explain these terms? Should I even use them? And they went, abso-freaking-lutely. You've got two terms, colonialism and post-colonialism, and all the authority that they represent. Let's kind of demystify those terms and break it down into what this kind of means in real life. So I guess that's been my approach to authority, is to kind of break it down, and drawings help me do that. You cannot, it helps me break through the kind of veneer of respectability when I'm drawing the Queen and she's little and she's, a slightly big nose and, and her own curls, right? So it's a really interesting way to energetically be in that space, this creative space of the drawn line, and in relationship to the written line as well. I don't know if I answered your question.
Oh, that's good. That's very interesting. It just like that. I see some of that question, that engagement, that bridge to it, the way that drawing the Queen in a cartoon sort of brings her, I don't know, down, but humanizes her on a level where you really meet on this level by the end of the book. I found it sort of really refreshing at a moment when, again, coming from my own American context, we're in a real sort of burn it down feel for Authority of All Stripes. You could imagine the anti-colonialist kids book that was a lot more fire breathing and not a bridge in a way that leads to a conversation. I think that's a really beautiful ambiguity or embrace or outreach or opening or something.
Yeah, I've got a really strong empathetic streak, and for years I just felt that it was a disadvantage because I could never take a occupy position completely and fully because I could always see the other person's side. I could, and so it wasn't until relatively recently that I learned, bridging is my superpower. That is, with the breaking down of my own name, Tusi to mean scribe or write, Tala to mean tell, and the I is in the middle. That's exactly where I meant to be. So I know that I know the magic of creative writing exists when it keeps feeding you back. Like I'm learning as I go, I'm deepening as I go. It's an incredibly empowering position to be in. And, the other thing that kind of ticks my boxes is when I run a workshop and I've got people who come to the workshop and they're like this about poetry. And by the end, they've created a 7-stanza poem about how they stand in the world. And it's been fun. And we've had lots of laughter, and it's been light and deep and tears. And, that's what it's about for me.
Thinking about this bridging, this story about Prince Philip and the post-colonial that you mentioned in your Guardian essay blew my mind. It's an amazing story, and it's this curveball on the whole project. I mean, it just is this wonderful complication of what's going on here. How does that? Can you tell that story, and can you connect it to the Mophead Tu?
And you know what, Dan? I went over and over with Sam Elworthy, my editor at AUP, Auckland University Press, because I had that in as a scene. Like, I have a conversation with Queen, I have a conversation with Prince Philip, Barack. And the thing is, we decided that it actually broke the rhythm. Like, there's so much in Mophead Tu. It's so deep, and yet to strike that balance between being clear and simple and not bringing too many issues to the surface was really important as well. And I know that graphic sequence will come up somewhere, some form, but like after I performed for the Queen and we met the royal family, immediately after the event in Westminster Abbey, and then later on that evening at Marlborough House, when it came time for me to meet with him, I greeted him, and he asked me, he said, "Well, what do you do?" And really, as I say in the article, I was the only 6-foot Samoan in electric blue, right, with big hair, and I just performed, and I replied, "I'm a poet, Your Highness," and he replied, "Yes, but what do you do?" They completely dismissed the Commonwealth poet.
Poet doesn't count. Yes. Okay. Yeah. We just flew you up here to be a poet, but.
Yeah. And then I replied, "Well, okay, you want a real answer? Well, I'm a lecturer at the University of Auckland in New Zealand, and I specialise in post-colonial literature." To which he replied, "Post," and then he just walked off, like no goodbye or nothing. So.
I mean, you got to admit it's a pretty good mic drop, even though it's just so it's it's interesting that it was in drafts of the book, because what remains is the Queen's people striking the word colonial from the poem, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is all an appreciation of the elegance and simplicity with the way that you dealt with the definition of sort of post-colonial in the book. We're still living in this, we're still living with it, alongside it, whatever. That felt to me like a really rich, even scholarly idea that just slips easily through in a kid's book. And then you have the Prince Philip moment alongside the editors taking that word out of your poem. He's using the word, reclaiming the word, using the word as a hammer, as a joke, I don't know, at the same time that you were not permitted to use it in Westminster Abbey?
Wow, yeah, you could write an academic essay on that, couldn't you, Dan? I mean, it's the conundrum, right? It's the ultimate paradox of living in a post-colonial society. And because I was at the Byron Bay Festival several years ago, and on stage with Melissa Lukashenko, who's an Aboriginal writer, and I shared that story, and so when I said, Prince Philip replied, "Post," Melissa took the microphone off me and she said, "The old bugger's got it right for once." So there you've got another, of course, there is no post in Australia for its First Nations people, for its Indigenous people. They're still very much in a colonial era. And I thought, wow, it also gave me appreciation for the late Prince Philip, because, man, if you watch seasons of The Crown, that, the dude had it tough in some ways, relatively speaking, and so through humor, that was a release valve. But humor just opens up multiple possibilities of reading. It doesn't close it down. And he did have a twinkle in his eye, right?
Oh, certainly, yeah.
But he may have been fully ignorant, or most likely not.
It seems impossible that it didn't have some, inflection about that. You're this magnificent moment of you reading this poem as a subject, I don't know, as a citizen, as a participant in this community that was at least at one point based upon this very thing, colonialism. But then the word is too touchy to say, but then you say it and it becomes a joke. And I don't know. I thought that was pretty magical, all of that. And I just really love that, all these issues, it's very sort of highfalutin, not academic, just, intellectual questions can, find their distillation so elegantly into, a cartoon and a kid's book.
Sure. And also to kind of not hide behind labels or not let other people hide behind labels. So, poem wasn't allowed to be political. So Mophead's like, well, are floating piglets political? What does that mean? Mm-hmm. and I love that little, little piglet has a part to play. Like he's throwing away the British flag, and then he's holding up a CO2 with a sign with a big mark through, and it's like, yeah, this is actually my life. So, don't dismiss me as political and therefore not able to be represented in this forum. We live life, and so it's on the page.
Mm-hmm. Well, that right there is a beautiful landing. I think that's a great note to end on. Selina, what a pleasure this has been. I love your work. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dan.
Good luck with the lecture today.
Thank you. I'm going to be showing some pages from Mophead Tu to explain colonialism to stage 2 students.
Awesome. Good. Wish I could be there.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Take care.